The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chambers stretched high above the assembled delegates, its walls pulsing with soft blue light that helped regulate the atmosphere for dozens of different species. Ambassador Lisa Carter walked steadily across the polished floor, her black diplomatic uniform crisp and formal, while her boots made quiet clicking sounds that echoed in the vast space. Behind her, Captain Ryan Brooks followed in his navy blue military dress uniform, his face calm, but his eyes alert as they scanned the hundreds of alien delegates arranged in their species-specific seating areas. The air smelled of ozone and strange chemical mixtures that kept all the different breathing requirements satisfied. Lisa had been coming to these chambers for 3 years now, but she still felt small beneath the towering architecture designed to accommodate beings that ranged from tiny crystalline entities to massive gas-breathing creatures that floated in specialized containment fields. Council Prime Nexus Veltar rose from his elevated platform at the center of the chamber. The Altarian leader stood 12 feet tall, his silver skin reflecting the ambient light while his 4 arms gestured gracefully. His species had been part of the council for over 2,000 years, and their arrogance showed in every movement. When he spoke, his voice boomed through the translation systems that converted his words into the native languages of every species present. "We gather today to address the growing concern regarding the human presence in our galaxy," Veltar announced, his tone carrying the weight of absolute authority. "The species known as Homo sapiens has expanded beyond acceptable parameters and has shown concerning independence from council oversight." Lisa kept her expression neutral as she took her place at the human delegation podium. She had expected this meeting for months. The signs had been clear in the private conversations, the delayed responses to human requests, and the increasingly cold reception at diplomatic gatherings. The other species had been talking among themselves, and humanity had not been invited to those discussions. "The human expansion rate exceeds all established norms," continued Veltar as holographic displays showed maps of human colonial territories. "In merely 200 years since first contact, they have established settlements in 17 star systems and have developed technologies that rival species with millennia of advancement." A murmur went through the chamber as delegates from various species voiced their agreement. The insectoid Fixara clicked their approval, while the crystalline entities chimed in harmony. Lisa noticed that not all species seemed enthusiastic about the discussion, but none spoke up in defense of humanity. Captain Brooks leaned slightly toward Lisa and whispered, "They've been planning this for a while." Lisa nodded almost imperceptibly. They had suspected as much when several joint research projects had been suddenly suspended without explanation, and when human ships had been denied docking privileges at certain stations. Veltar activated another holographic display showing human military vessels. "The humans have developed weapon systems and defensive capabilities that they refuse to share with the Council. This violates the spirit of cooperation that binds our galactic community together." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Lisa knew it was partially true, but grossly misrepresented. Humanity had shared most of their innovations freely, contributing to medical advances, agricultural improvements, and communication technologies that had benefited every council species. The few military technologies they kept classified were defensive systems designed to protect human colonies from raiders and hostile entities that existed outside council space. Furthermore, Veltar continued, human diplomatic practices show a disturbing tendency toward independent action. They have negotiated separate trade agreements, established research partnerships outside council oversight, and have repeatedly declined to submit their colonial governance to council review. Lisa felt a familiar frustration building in her chest. Every item Veltar mentioned was perfectly legal under council law. Humanity had followed every rule, respected every boundary, and contributed more to galactic civilization in 2 centuries than some species had managed in millennia. Yet here they stood, accused of being too successful, too independent, too human. The draconian representative, a reptilian being with scales that shifted color based on emotion, rose to speak. The humans have also interfered in conflicts that were none of their concern. Their peacekeeping efforts have disrupted traditional power balances and prevented natural selection from taking its course among lesser species. This drew approving growls from several predator species. Lisa realized that humanity's tendency to help smaller, weaker civilizations had created resentment among those who preferred a galaxy where might made right. The human values of equality and cooperation were seen as threats to established hierarchies. Veltar gestured grandly as he prepared to deliver the main point of the gathering. Therefore, the Council has reached a unanimous decision regarding the requirements for continued human participation in galactic civilization. Lisa's blood ran cold at the word unanimous. That meant every single species had voted against humanity, including those they considered allies and friends. The betrayal cut deeper than she had expected. First, Veltar announced, humanity must surrender administrative control of all Outer Rim colonies to Council oversight. These territories are too strategically important to remain under single-species control. The demand was outrageous. Those colonies housed over 50 million humans who had spent generations building new worlds from scratch. They were thriving communities with their own cultures and governments, not military outposts. Second, all human technological innovations must be immediately shared with the Council Science Division. No research may be conducted without Council approval and supervision. Lisa's hands clenched into fists. This would essentially end human scientific independence and turn their brightest minds into servants of alien interests. Third, the human military must submit to Council command structure. No human vessel may operate without Council authorization, and all defensive systems must be placed under joint control. A final demand was perhaps the most insulting. It would leave humanity defenseless against any species that decided they posed a threat. These requirements are non-negotiable, Veltar concluded. Humanity has 72 standard hours to confirm their compliance. Failure to accept these terms will result in immediate expulsion from Council space and the revocation of all trade agreements and diplomatic protections. The chamber fell silent, except for the humming of life support systems. Lisa stood perfectly still, her mind racing through the implications. This was not a negotiation or a request for compromise. This was an ultimatum designed to force humanity into submission or drive them away entirely. Captain Brooks maintained his military posture, but Lisa could see the anger burning in his eyes. They had both served humanity faithfully, working to build bridges between their species and the rest of the galaxy. Now they were being told that all their efforts meant nothing. Lisa looked around the chamber at faces both familiar and strange. She had shared meals with some of these beings, worked on joint projects with others, and considered many of them friends. Yet not one of them met her gaze now. Not one of them showed any sign of regret or sympathy for what they were demanding. "We understand the Council's position," Lisa said finally, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite its quiet tone. "We will need the full 72 hours to consider this proposal and consult with our government." Veltar nodded with obvious satisfaction. "The Council awaits your response, Ambassador Carter. We trust that humanity will make the wise choice." As Lisa and Captain Brooks turned to leave the chamber, she caught the subtle hand signal she gave. Him. It was a simple gesture that would mean nothing to alien observers, but Brooks understood immediately. The signal meant Execute Protocol 7, a contingency plan that had been developed years ago but never implemented. Walking through the corridors of the Council complex, Lisa felt a strange sense of relief washing over her. For 3 years, She had worked tirelessly to maintain humanity's place in galactic politics, making compromise after compromise, accepting insult after insult, all in the name of peaceful coexistence. Now the pretense was finally over. The other species had shown their true nature. They wanted humanity's contributions, but not humanity's independence. They wanted human innovation, but not human values. They wanted servants, not partners. As they reached their shuttle, Captain Brooks finally spoke. "How long do you think it will take?" he asked quietly. Lisa looked back at the towering spires of the council complex, then up at the stars that held so much promise for her species. 60 hours, she replied. Maybe less if everyone moves quickly. The shuttle lifted off into the alien sky, carrying the last human diplomats away from a council that had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. They simply did not know it yet. The evacuation began 36 hours before the council's deadline expired. Across 17 star systems, human colonies received identical coded messages that activated emergency protocols most citizens had never heard of, but had been quietly prepared for years. The message was simple and direct. Pack light, move fast, leave nothing behind that matters. Colonial Governor Pete Johnson stood on the observation deck of New Seattle's administrative center, watching as the massive cargo ships descended through the planet's purple-tinted atmosphere. The sight should have been chaotic, but instead it moved with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. Every human settlement had practiced evacuation drills, disguised as emergency preparedness exercises, and now those preparations showed their true value. "Governor, the Malthury delegation is requesting a meeting," his aide announced. The neighboring alien species had maintained friendly relations with New Seattle for over 40 years, trading agricultural products and sharing cultural exchanges. "Tell them I'm unavailable," Pete replied without turning from the window. "All external communications are suspended until further notice." Below, families walked calmly toward transport vehicles while automated systems loaded their possessions into standardized containers. Children carried backpacks and small toys, their parents maintaining cheerful attitudes that hid the gravity of what was happening. No one ran, no one panicked, and no one looked back with regret. The Malthury had been good neighbors, but they had also voted with the Council. Every species that humanity had helped, traded with, and defended had chosen to stand against them when the moment came. Pete felt no obligation to explain humanity's departure to beings who had already made their position clear. On the orbital shipyards circling Kepler 442b, Chief Engineer Susan Walsh supervised the systematic dismantling of construction facilities that had taken decades to build. The massive space docks could construct vessels up to 12 kilometers in length, making them among the most advanced shipbuilding facilities in the galaxy. Now, piece by carefully designed piece, they were being loaded onto specially modified cargo haulers. "Ma'am, the crystalline entities are asking why we're removing the quantum resonance chambers," reported technician Barry Adams as he monitored the alien communications channels. "Tell them it's routine maintenance," Susan replied while watching. Another section of the shipyard folded itself into a compact transport configuration. They'll figure out the truth soon enough. The quantum resonance chambers were human innovations that had revolutionized faster-than-light construction techniques. Without them, building large vessels would take the aliens 10 times longer and cost exponentially more resources. Susan had personally designed the collapsible architecture that made the current evacuation possible, though she had told the Council it was simply for emergency repairs. Every piece of human technology was built with hidden capabilities that allowed for rapid relocation. The aliens had assumed this was typical human over-engineering, but it had actually been careful preparation for exactly this scenario. Dr. Kalena Rodriguez finished encrypting the last of her research files before activating the data purge systems in her laboratory. As the lead geneticist for the Interspecies Medical Cooperation Initiative, she had access to biological information from dozens of species. The aliens had shared their genetic data freely, trusting human scientists to help develop treatments for diseases that affected multiple species. All files secured, Doctor. Her assistant confirmed as the laboratory's quantum storage systems completed their erasure protocols. No recoverable data remains. Elena nodded sadly as she watched years of breakthrough research disappear into digital oblivion. Her work had led to treatments that saved millions of lives across the galaxy, but the aliens had made it clear that human contributions were unwelcome unless they came with human submission. If they wanted her knowledge, they should have considered that before voting to enslave her species. The evacuation of the human embassy on Nexus Prime proceeded with similar quiet efficiency. Ambassador Carter had departed hours earlier, but the embassy staff continued their duties until the final moment. Cultural artifacts were carefully packed, sensitive documents were destroyed, and the building's advanced systems were systematically shut down. Secretary Kevin Brown oversaw the removal of the embassy's communication array, a human-designed system that had provided secure quantum entanglement links across the entire galaxy. The aliens had grown dependent on its reliability and speed, but they had never bothered to learn how it worked. The Altarians are demanding access to the communication protocols, reported Communications Officer Nancy Hill as she watched alien security forces gathering outside the embassy. Protocol Omega is now in effect, Kevin replied. All external requests are to be ignored. Protocol Omega meant that humanity was officially cutting all ties with galactic civilization. No more cooperation, no more assistance, no more patience with alien politics. The decision had been made at the highest levels of human government within hours of the Council's ultimatum. The gardens that Ambassador Carter had maintained behind the embassy were left pristine and beautiful, but the sophisticated irrigation systems that kept them thriving were quietly removed. The aliens would discover that Earth plants required very specific nutrient combinations and environmental controls that they had never needed to understand while humans handled the maintenance. Captain Tony Clark commanded the evacuation fleet in the Ross 128 system, coordinating the departure of over 3 million colonists from 6 different worlds. His ships moved in perfect formation, each vessel loaded to capacity with people and critical equipment while maintaining defensive positions against possible interference. Captain, we're detecting Council patrol ships approaching the system. Boundary, reported Navigator Lisa Green from the fleet's command vessel. Continue evacuation operations, Tony ordered. Do not acknowledge their presence or respond to communications. The Council ships maintained their distance, apparently uncertain about how to handle the unprecedented situation. No species had ever voluntarily abandoned multiple star systems before, and galactic law provided no guidance for preventing a peaceful withdrawal. Trade. Representative Carlos Martinez had spent his career building commercial relationships between humanity and dozens of alien species. Now he supervised the termination of every contract, agreement, and partnership that had taken decades to establish. The economic implications would be devastating for many species, but they had chosen their path when they voted against humanity. Sir, the Vegan Trade Consortium is offering to renegotiate our shipping agreements, his assistant reported. All renegotiations are permanently suspended, Carlos replied, while authorizing the final contract cancellations. Human commercial. Interests are withdrawing from Council space indefinitely. The vegans had built their entire interstellar economy around human shipping routes and logistics expertise. Without human involvement, their trade network would collapse within months. But Carlos felt no sympathy for beings who had supported humanity's enslavement. Professor Roy Davis watched his agricultural research stations being evacuated across a dozen worlds. His innovations in hydroponic farming and soil enhancement had parent planets into garden worlds, supporting not just human colonies, but also providing food security for several alien species with limited agricultural capabilities. Professor, should we leave the crop genetic databases for the local populations? Asked research assistant Helen White. Absolutely not, Roy replied firmly. Pack everything. If they wanted our help, they should have stood with us instead of against us. The genetic databases contained the results of 2 centuries of careful breeding and modification work. Without them, many worlds would face food shortages within a single growing season. Roy had dedicated his life to ending hunger throughout the galaxy, but he would not allow his work to benefit species that had betrayed his own Dr. Nancy. White supervised the evacuation of the medical facilities that treated rare diseases affecting crystalline-based life forms. Her research had prevented several extinction events among silicon-based species, but now her laboratories were being systematically emptied of equipment and data. Doctor, the crystalline entities are experiencing a medical emergency, reported medic Tom Wilson. They're requesting immediate assistance. Our medical services are no longer available to council species, Nancy replied while watching the last of her experimental treatments being loaded onto transport ships. They'll need to find alternative care. The crystalline beings had unique metabolic requirements that only human scientists fully understood. Without continued treatment, their entire species faced a slow decline that could lead to extinction within a few generations. As the final human ships departed from council space, they left behind worlds that had been transformed by human presence. Gardens withered without proper care, communication networks failed without maintenance, and trade routes collapsed without human coordination. The aliens had demanded human submission, but instead they received human absence. The galaxy suddenly felt much larger and lonelier than it had just days before. Where human voices had once offered assistance, advice, and friendship, there was now only silence. 6 months after the human withdrawal, the first signs of trouble appeared in the most unexpected places. Captain Zix Ara of the Vegan Trade Consortium stared at his navigation display with growing confusion as his cargo ship drifted in empty space, 3 days behind schedule and completely lost. Navigation officer, explain to me why we are not in the Altair system as planned, Zixara demanded, his tentacles writhing with frustration. Navigation officer Kreltok manipulated his instruments, desperately trying to make sense of readings that should have been simple. Sir, the hyperspace beacon network shows multiple failures. The quantum positioning signals are degraded beyond acceptable parameters. What neither alien understood was that Dr. Elena Rodriguez had designed the beacon maintenance protocols that kept their faster-than-light navigation accurate. Her team had quietly serviced thousands of navigation beacons across the galaxy, updating their quantum signatures and maintaining their synchronization with galactic positioning networks. Without human maintenance, the beacons were slowly drifting out of alignment. Similar problems plagued shipping lanes throughout council space. Vessels that had relied on human-maintained infrastructure found themselves arriving at wrong destinations, taking twice as long to reach their targets, or simply getting lost in the vast emptiness between stars. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades began experiencing delays that cascaded into economic chaos. The crystalline entities faced a more immediate crisis. Elder Crystal Harmony, Seal felt the painful deterioration spreading through her silicon matrix as her species. Unique biology began to fail. The specialized treatments that Dr. Nancy White had developed were no longer available, and no other species understood the complex chemical processes that kept crystalline life forms stable. Harmony Sil, we have lost another 12 members of our community today, reported Junior Crystal Pulsiara, her normally clear form clouded with stress fractures. The degradation is spreading faster than our traditional healing methods can address. The crystalline beings had existed for millions of years, but their introduction to galactic civilization had exposed them to new forms of radiation and chemical contamination that their bodies could not process naturally. Human medical science had provided treatments that allowed them to thrive in the modern galaxy, but now those treatments were gone. "Have we attempted to contact the human medical facilities?" Harmony so asked, though she already knew the answer. "All human territories remain closed to outside communication," Pulziara replied sadly. "Our messages receive only automated responses, stating that human medical services are unavailable to Council species." On the agricultural world of Demeter 7, Colonial Administrator Vorth Ani of the Hegemony watched helplessly as crops failed. Across entire continents, the fertile planet had been transformed from a barren rock into a garden world through human agricultural innovations. But maintaining that productivity required constant monitoring and adjustment of soil compositions. "Administrator, the wheat fields in Sector 7 are showing signs of nutrient depletion," reported Agricultural Specialist Temporo. "The automated fertilization systems are requesting protocols that our databases do not contain." Vorth Ani felt a growing dread as he realized the scope of their problem. Professor Roy Davis had designed agricultural systems that seemed simple on the surface, but relied on incredibly complex interactions between modified crops, engineered soil bacteria, and precisely timed nutrient delivery. Without human oversight, those systems were beginning to collapse. "What about the backup protocols?" Vorth Ani asked desperately. "The backup systems required genetic modification codes that were maintained by human scientists," Temporo explained. "We do not have access to that information." Similar agricultural crises were developing on dozens of worlds throughout Council. Space. Planets that had supported billions of beings through human-developed farming techniques now faced the prospect of widespread famine within a single growing season. The communication networks that connected galactic civilization began experiencing mysterious failures that frustrated every species except the humans who had designed them. Director Flux Ara of the Galactic Communications Authority studied reports of quantum entanglement link failures with growing panic. "These systems worked perfectly for over 50 years, Flux Ara complained to his technical staff. "How can they suddenly be experiencing cascade failures across multiple sectors?" Communications technician Datanex examined the quantum encryption protocols that kept interstellar messages secure. "Sir, it appears that the encryption keys were automatically updated by human-maintained servers. Without those updates, the entire network is vulnerable to interference and hacking." The humans had quietly become the backbone of galactic communications infrastructure. Their quantum encryption methods were far more advanced than anything other species had developed, but they required constant maintenance and security updates that only human technicians knew how to provide. Within weeks, sensitive diplomatic communications were being intercepted by criminal organizations. Financial transactions were becoming unsafe, and military coordination between council species was compromised. The secure communications that had enabled modern galactic civilization simply stopped working. Border conflicts that had been kept under control by human peacekeeping forces began escalating into serious wars. Colonel Jake Thompson's peacekeeping units had maintained stability in several volatile regions through a combination of diplomatic skill and overwhelming defensive capability. Without human intervention, old grudges and territorial disputes erupted into violence. The Draconian Empire and the Hegemony had maintained an uneasy truce over the resource-rich Tau Ceti system for over 30 years. Human peacekeepers had monitored the border and prevented incidents from escalating into full conflict. Now, without neutral human forces to maintain the peace, both sides began mobilizing for war. "The hegemony has violated our territorial boundaries," declared War Commander Skaroth of the Draconian fleet. Without the human peacekeepers to hide behind, they show their true cowardice. Hegemony Admiral Voidrax responded with equal hostility. The Draconians have always been savages held in check only by human intervention. Now we will show them the price of aggression. Similar conflicts erupted across a dozen border regions where human diplomacy had maintained peaceful coexistence. Between hostile species, the carefully negotiated treaties and monitoring agreements that had prevented wars required human arbitration to function properly. The galactic medical research programs that had protected all species from pandemic diseases began failing as human expertise disappeared. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had coordinated disease monitoring and treatment, development programs that involved dozens of species and thousands of research facilities. We have lost contact with the primary disease monitoring station in the Vega system, reported Medical Coordinator Heel Ara during an Emergency Health Council meeting. Without human coordination, our early warning systems are blind to emerging threats. The sophisticated disease surveillance network that had prevented several potential galactic pandemics required human analytical methods and biological expertise that no other species possessed. Alien medical researchers had relied on human insights into biological adaptation and genetic modification to develop treatments for diseases that affected multiple species. Economic systems throughout Council space began experiencing failures as human financial expertise disappeared from critical institutions. Trade Representative Carlos Martinez had designed complex economic models that balanced the needs of dozens of different species with completely different resource requirements and economic systems. The interstellar currency exchange rates are fluctuating beyond acceptable parameters, reported financial analyst Count Ara of the Galactic Banking Consortium. Without human economic modeling, we cannot maintain stability. The sophisticated financial instruments that had enabled trade between species with incompatible economic systems required constant adjustment and monitoring. Human economists had developed algorithms that accounted for the different biological needs, cultural values, and resource cycles of dozens of species, without human oversight. The galactic economy began experiencing inflation, currency collapses, and trade disputes that threatened to destroy the commercial relationships that held civilization together. Research facilities throughout the galaxy found themselves unable to continue projects that had seemed routine while human scientists were available. The Joint Physics Research Institute lost access to quantum manipulation techniques that had enabled breakthrough discoveries in faster-than-light travel and energy generation. We cannot replicate the quantum field calculations that Dr. Samuel Green's team provided, admitted Research Director Thinkara during a frustrated meeting of alien scientists. Their mathematical models used concepts that our education systems do not teach. Human scientific methods had advanced far beyond what other species had achieved, but they had shared their knowledge freely through joint research programs. Now, that knowledge was gone, leaving alien scientists unable to continue work that had seemed simple when human colleagues were available to provide guidance. 1 year after humanity's silent departure, the Galactic Council authorized the first desperate search mission to locate their missing species. Captain Amanda Foster commanded a joint species task force aboard the exploration vessel Harmonies. Dream, leading representatives from 12 different species on what they hoped would be a simple, diplomatic mission to negotiate humanity's return. Approaching the Sol system now, reported Navigator Sikara, as the familiar yellow star appeared on their displays. All sensors are active and scanning for human presence. Amanda felt her stomach clench with anxiety as they drew closer to Earth. The blue-green world that had been humanity's cradle should have been bustling with activity, orbital stations, and defensive platforms. Instead, their sensors showed nothing but empty space and a planet that appeared completely uninhabited. "This cannot be correct," muttered Science Officer Deepara of the Altarian delegation. "A world cannot simply be abandoned so completely." But as their detailed scans continued, the impossible truth became undeniable. Earth showed no signs of recent habitation. The massive orbital cities that had housed billions of humans were gone without a trace. Even the space elevators that had connected the planet's surface to orbital infrastructure had been completely removed. There are no electromagnetic signatures indicating active technology, reported communications specialist Wavy Ara. No power generation, no communication networks, no life support systems. The planet appears to have been uninhabited for at least 6 months. Amanda authorized landing parties to investigate the surface while she struggled to understand how an entire species could vanish so thoroughly. The landing teams found pristine cities with no signs of damage or struggle, but also no signs of recent occupation. Buildings stood empty but clean. Parks remained maintained by automated systems. But no humans remained anywhere. "Captain, you need to see this," called ground team leader Sir Shara from the former United Nations headquarters in New York. "We have found something significant." The team had discovered a single computer terminal left active in the main assembly hall, displaying a simple message that had been waiting for whoever eventually came looking for humanity. The words were in every major galactic language, ensuring that any species could understand their meaning. "To whoever finds this message, humanity has departed for destinations unknown. We held no malice toward any species, but we will not submit to enslavement. The galaxy is yours now. Use it wisely." The message was signed by President Katie Morgan of the Emergency Coalition Government, the temporary administration that had apparently overseen humanity's evacuation. No other information was provided, no clues about where they had gone or how they had managed such a complete departure. "Search all human colonies and outposts," Amanda ordered, though she already suspected what they would find. "Document everything, but do not disturb any systems that remain active." The search expanded to every known human settlement throughout their former territory. New Seattle showed the same pattern of complete abandonment without damage. The Kepler 442b shipyards were empty space where massive construction facilities had once operated. Research stations, mining operations, agricultural worlds, and defensive outposts all stood vacant but undamaged. Commander Ben Parker led the technical analysis team that studied the energy signatures left behind by human evacuation efforts. His expertise in exotic physics made him the best qualified person to understand how humanity had achieved such a thorough disappearance. "The quantum residue patterns are unlike anything in our databases," Ben reported during the mission's daily briefing. "These signatures suggest the humans developed transportation technology far beyond our current understanding." The readings indicated that humanity had not simply loaded conventional starships and flown away. The energy patterns suggested some form of advanced space-time manipulation that had allowed them to transport massive amounts of material and people across vast distances instantaneously. "How advanced would their technology need to be to achieve this?" asked Diplomatic Representative Honorara. "Conservative estimates suggest they achieved breakthrough discoveries that place them centuries ahead of our current capabilities." Ben replied grimly, "We are not dealing with a species that fled in panic. They executed a planned evacuation using technology we cannot comprehend. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not been the junior species that the Council had assumed them to be. They had been quietly developing capabilities that surpassed anything achieved by civilizations with thousands of years of galactic experience. Back in Council space, the situation continued deteriorating at an accelerating pace. The crystalline entities faced possible extinction as their population declined daily from metabolic failures that human medicine had once prevented. The agricultural worlds that fed billions of beings experienced crop failures that threatened massive famines. Communication networks became increasingly unreliable as security systems failed and criminal interference increased. Emergency medical. Director Kurihara struggled to find alternatives to human medical expertise as pandemic outbreaks began occurring in several sectors. We have identified 17 different disease strains that require immediate attention, she reported to the Emergency Health Council. Without human diagnostic protocols and treatment methodologies, we cannot contain these outbreaks effectively. The sophisticated medical monitoring systems that had prevented galactic pandemics relied on human understanding of biological adaptation and genetic analysis. Alien medical professionals found themselves unable to develop treatments for diseases that crossed species boundaries, a field where human scientists had excelled. Food distribution networks collapsed as agricultural specialists discovered that human farming innovations required constant monitoring and adjustment that no other species understood how to provide. Worlds that had supported large populations through advanced agricultural techniques now faced starvation as crop yields dropped to fractions of their previous levels. The soil enhancement systems are failing across 12 major agricultural worlds, reported Agricultural Coordinator Grau Ara. We estimate food shortages affecting over 2 billion beings within the next 6 months. The complex biological and chemical interactions that human scientists had engineered to transform barren worlds into garden planets required expertise that had taken humanity centuries to develop. Alien agricultural specialists found themselves unable to maintain systems they had never truly understood. Economic chaos spread throughout the galaxy as financial institutions struggled to operate without human economic modeling and analysis. The sophisticated trading algorithms that had balanced the needs of dozens of different species collapsed, leading to currency fluctuations and market crashes that destroyed interstellar commerce. The Galactic Credit Standard has lost 40% of its value this month, reported economic analyst Value Era. Trade partnerships are dissolving as species resort to primitive barter systems. Military conflicts erupted in regions where human peacekeeping forces had maintained stability for decades. The Draconian Empire and the hegemony engaged in full-scale war over the Tau Ceti system, while smaller conflicts broke out along borders that had been peaceful under human arbitration. Casualty reports indicate over 3 million military deaths in the past month, reported War Analysis Coordinator Fight Ara. These conflicts show no signs of resolution without neutral intervention. The diplomatic protocols and conflict resolution methods that humans had developed required cultural understanding and psychological insights that other species had never developed. Alien diplomats found themselves unable to bridge the gaps between hostile species without human mediation. Research programs throughout the galaxy ground to a halt as alien scientists discovered their dependence on human theoretical frameworks and analytical methods. Joint research facilities shut down as projects became impossible to continue without human expertise. We have been forced to suspend 87% of our active research programs, reported Research Coordinator Now Ara. The remaining projects are limited to basic maintenance of existing systems, the quantum physics and advanced mathematics. That humans had contributed to galactic science were far more sophisticated than what other species had achieved independently. Without human guidance, alien researchers found themselves unable to understand or maintain the advanced technologies they had come to depend upon. Council. Prime Nexus Veltar convened emergency sessions daily as reports of cascading failures arrived from every sector of galactic civilization. The proud leader who had delivered ultimatums to humanity now faced the collapse of everything the Council had built over thousands of years. Provide me with a comprehensive assessment, he demanded of his advisors. How severe is our situation? Complete systemic failure within 18 months, came the devastating reply. Every critical infrastructure depends on human expertise that we cannot replace. The Council had not simply lost a member species. They had lost the foundation that had enabled their advanced civilization to function. Without humanity's contributions, the galaxy was reverting to a collection of isolated species struggling with technologies they could no longer maintain or understand. 2 years after the ultimatum that had driven humanity away, the Galactic Council chambers stood nearly empty. Half the member species had withdrawn from galactic politics as their governments collapsed under economic ruin and social chaos. Those who remained gathered in desperate emergency sessions that produced nothing but arguments and blame. Council Prime Nixus Veltar looked older and more fragile than his species normally appeared. The silver sheen of his skin had dulled to gray, and his forearms moved with the slow uncertainty of someone who had lost all confidence in his decisions. Around him, the remaining delegates represented civilizations that were barely holding together. The crystalline entities report that their population has declined by 60%, announced Emergency Coordinator Lastara, her voice barely above a whisper. They estimate complete extinction within 6 months without human medical intervention. The crystalline beings had been among the oldest and most advanced species in the galaxy, their silicon-based bodies seemingly eternal and unchanging. Now they faced a slow death from metabolic failures that only human science had understood how to prevent. The agricultural worlds can no longer support their populations, continued Lastara. Famine conditions exist on 47 planets, with more expected as crop failures continue spreading. The engineered ecosystems that human scientists had created were collapsing without proper maintenance. Billions of beings faced starvation on worlds that had once been garden paradises, while the knowledge needed to save them had vanished with humanity. Military conflicts have claimed over 15 million lives, Lastara added with growing despair. Border wars continue escalating without neutral peacekeepers to enforce ceasefire agreements. The carefully negotiated peace treaties that had prevented major wars for generations were worthless without human arbitrators to resolve disputes. Species that had coexisted peacefully under human guidance now slaughtered each other over resources. And Territory. Explorer Captain Tony Clark had spent 18 months following the faint trail of humanity's departure, using experimental tracking technology to analyze the quantum signatures left by their advanced transportation methods. His final report to the Emergency Council session was both fascinating and devastating. My analysis confirms that humanity did not relocate within our galaxy, Tony announced to the stunned assembly. The quantum resonance patterns indicate they achieved some form of intergalactic travel capability. The implications were staggering. While the Council had been focused on maintaining traditional power structures, humanity had developed technology that allowed them to travel between galaxies as easily as other species traveled between star systems. Based on the direction vectors and energy dispersal patterns, they appear to have departed toward the Andromeda Galaxy, Tony continued. The scale of their evacuation suggests they transported not just people and equipment, but entire manufactured habitats and industrial facilities. Several council members made sounds of distress as they realized the full scope of what they had lost. Humanity had not simply fled to another part of the galaxy where they might eventually be found and convinced to return. They had left for an entirely different galaxy over 2 million light-years away. Is pursuit possible? Asked Veltar desperately. The energy requirements would exceed the total power generation capacity of our entire civilization, Tony replied. Even if we could develop similar transportation technology, we lack the resources to follow them. The emergency communication systems that connected the remaining Council worlds began experiencing total failures as the last human-maintained quantum encryption protocols expired. Criminal organizations and hostile entities that existed outside Council space launched coordinated attacks on the vulnerable networks. All secure communications have been compromised, reported Communications Director Silent Hara. We can know. Longer coordinate government activities across multiple star systems. The galactic internet that had enabled modern civilization was collapsing into chaos as security systems failed and infrastructure degraded without maintenance. The remaining Council species found themselves isolated and unable to coordinate. Responses to the cascading crises, economic systems, that had operated smoothly for centuries, underwent complete collapse as the final human-designed financial algorithms failed. The galactic currency became worthless. Interstellar trade stopped functioning, and entire species faced economic ruin. The Vegan Trade Consortium has declared bankruptcy, reported Economic Coordinator Brokiara. Their shipping networks have completely failed without human logistics support. The vegans had built their entire civilization around facilitating trade between other species. Without human transportation technology and route optimization, their business model became impossible to maintain. Research facilities throughout the galaxy shut down permanently as alien scientists admitted they could not continue work that required human theoretical frameworks. The joint research programs that had driven technological advancement for generations ended in failure and abandonment. We estimate that our civilization has regressed by approximately 300 years in terms of technological capability, reported Science Director Backward Ara. Recovery to current levels would require centuries, assuming we can prevent further decline. The advanced technologies that had defined modern galactic civilization were becoming museum pieces that one knew how to maintain or repair. Faster-than-light travel became unreliable, communication networks failed, medical treatments disappeared, and agricultural techniques reverted to primitive methods. In the depths of space, beyond the galaxy's edge, humanity had established a thriving civilization that surpassed anything they had achieved while part of the Council. President Katie Morgan stood in the observation deck of New Earth Station, watching as construction ships built the foundations of humanity's new galactic empire. Status report on the Andromeda colonies, she requested from Colonial Coordinator Sam Davis. 14 star systems fully operational, 37 more under development, Sam replied with obvious pride. Population growth is ahead of projections, and our technological advancement rate has increased by 200% since leaving Council space. Free from the restrictions and political interference of galactic civilization, humanity had unleashed their full creative and innovative potential. The transportation technology that had enabled their exodus was only the beginning of breakthroughs that were revolutionizing their understanding of physics and reality. Any contact from the Council? Katie asked. Long-range sensors detect multiple Council ships attempting to track our departure route, Sam reported. They appear to be using primitive technology that cannot follow our quantum trail beyond galactic boundaries. Katie felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction as she contemplated the species they had left behind. She had genuinely hoped that peaceful coexistence was possible, but the Council had made their position clear. They wanted human contributions without human independence. Prepare a message probe for transmission to Council space, Katie ordered. It's time to let them know what they chose when they demanded our submission. The probe that eventually reached the dying Council carried a message from Admiral Helen Gray of the Human Colonial Alliance. Her words were brief but definitive. We found something better out here. You are welcome to join us if you ever learn to appreciate cooperation over domination. The message included star charts showing the location of human colonies in Andromeda, but accessing them would require technology that the Council species could not develop without human assistance. It was an offer of hope that could only be claimed by beings who had learned from their mistakes. Veltar listened to the message in the empty Council chambers, his remaining advisors standing silently as they contemplated their choices. Around them, the crystal dome that had once housed representatives of dozens of thriving civilizations now held only the remnants of a collapsing society. "Begin drafting a formal apology to humanity," Galtar ordered quietly. "Perhaps in a few generations, we will be worthy of their forgiveness." The few remaining council species began the long, difficult process of rebuilding their civilization from the ground up. They were forced to relearn technologies they had taken for granted, redevelop agricultural methods that could sustain their populations, and find ways to resolve conflicts without human arbitration. Some species managed to adapt and survive the collapse. Others failed completely and became extinct as their specialized needs could no longer be met without human expertise. The galaxy that had once teemed with thriving civilizations became a collection of struggling survivors trying to maintain basic technological functionality. In the years that followed, occasional probes arrived from human space carrying updates on their progress in Andromeda. The messages described wonders beyond imagination, artificial planets built to perfect specifications, technologies that manipulated space and time, and a growing alliance of species that had chosen cooperation over domination. The coordinates remained available for any council species that could develop the technology to make the journey. It would require centuries of technological advancement and social evolution, but the possibility existed for those willing to learn from humanity's example.